Namaste and welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I have with me Abhijit Iyer-Mitra to discuss the latest ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. Abhijit, welcome.
Very well.
So Abhijit, the fighting started abruptly and then the ceasefire was also announced when very many few people were expecting, because Israel was saying that offensive will go on. And one fine day we saw that there was a ceasefire agreement. So what happened out there?
Several things happened out there. The Egyptians never like an unstable border. So they've actually been very honest brokers in all of this, trying to bring about an end to the situation. The second thing, of course, was American pressure. You can never discount American pressure in all these things. And what we do know is that there was significant American pressure on Israel to tone it down. Because like we've seen, there is this concerted attempt now to pull down Israel for supporting. It's an accumulation of issues. It's not just because of Biden, but it's also the role the Israelis and the Saudis played in torpedoing the Iran nuclear deal, right? The JCPOA. So it's an accumulation of events. Ultimately, America will always give diplomatic protection to Israel up to a certain point. So Israel is fundamentally obliged to finish off its offensive till the point America says it can withstand XYZ diplomatic pressure. Now, if you read the history of Israel and America, you look at Henry Kissinger, in fact. There's a whole number of biographies, but Henry Kissinger was, presided over several resolutions against Israel. What you find is that it depends very much on the attitude the serving president takes towards Israel. So Israel is always guaranteed a veto on demand, but the length of that veto in demand, the length of the period of the veto in demand, depends on how disposed or indisposed the serving president is towards the Israelis. Here you had a short thing. We clearly know that the Israelis were planning a lot more, and it was cut short. Because I can tell you personally, the Israelis saw a very significant opportunity now to finish off large parts of Hamas. They haven't been able to do it. And that for them, they believe is problematic, because history tells us that, unless Hamas gets a big enough blow, they'll start it all over again. Because all you need to wait for is for the situation to become untenable in Hamas-controlled Gaza again. And the only way of relieving that pressure is to start a war with Israel, right? External disturbances work. So this is what they do every time.
What do you mean by situation becoming untenable in Hamas-controlled Gaza?
Lots of things. So, for example, right now, what you see is that the entire foreign exchange reserve has been destroyed, because the Bank of Gaza was destroyed. But usually what happens is when, there is no political expression. If you have any kind of political expression, you're immediately killed off in Gaza. You try supporting anybody else, you're killed off. Incidentally, the same thing happens in the West Bank. If you notice, what's been happening over the last 2-3 days has been that Fatah supporters have been finding out who all supported Hamas on Twitter, and they've been going after them. Twitter, Facebook, anything, they're scanning it. They're going to people's houses and killing them. Hamas would be doing something. See, in Hamas-controlled territory, there's not much that you can do. But if you do, you are killed off immediately. They don't tolerate any kind of political dissent out there. No elections, no nothing. It's just Hamas military rule. Everything is for the so-called resistance. So what happens is, a non-existent economy, you're getting the basics. You're getting some electricity, you're getting some food, you're getting some petrol, you have some medical facilities. But how long can you continue like that? So after a point, the same thing. It's like being in permanent lockdown, in that sense. It's actually a really small piece of land. It's not such a big piece of land. It's like spending the last 15 years, just having lived in I don't know, maybe Greater Kailash 1 plus Greater Kailash 2 plus South Extension. Right? I mean, you can't live like that. So it gets, where is the economic growth? There is zero economic growth. There is no room for innovation, a normal life, or anything. It's just a subsistence living throughout. So after a point, fatigue sets in. And then it has to be released through something like this. This is, if you want a parallel argument, look at jail. Jail can't always be about punishment. That is why you need carrots. You need things like parole. You need things like teaching skills to the inmates, or classes for inmates and things like that. Why? So that they always have an incentive to behave themselves. So it's very similar to that. They're in a very large jail, and they need to, at some point, and there are no carrots available. So at some point, the disaffection just ubhad ke aata.
Mm-hmm. But, what is the role played by Iran in this entire conflict? Because Hamas has, I think, publicly thanked Iran for the support and supply of weapons and other things. And then what is the role of the Egypt in the entire thing?
The role of Iran is commission. The role of Egypt is omission. Why? Because Egypt has actually, by all measures, President Sisi has been pretty damn good at trying to control smuggling happening from Egypt into the Gaza Strip. He's been very, very hard on the Muslim Brotherhood and any affiliated bodies. The problem for him has always been that, it's a pre-industrial state. The police and the military are always prone to bribery. So, if you incentivize somebody through something, it always becomes a route for bribery. It's become a lot tougher under Sisi. And to be fair, even Morsi, who was Muslim Brotherhood effectively, was quite strict about these things. He wasn't allowing smuggling. Whatever happened used to happen in spite of the police and in spite of the military. But remember, it is a long, porous border. Even that little strip, the Egyptian-Israeli border is a long, porous border. It's just open desert. But even that little strip with Gaza, there are always smuggling opportunities available. Right? So it does happen. It's very tough. So, for example, if a kilo of gunpowder, or not gunpowder, say about 100 bullets, costs you 1,000 rupees in the open market, the cost of smuggling it to Hamas becomes disproportionate. It becomes something like 50, 60,000 rupees because of the cost involved. I think, I don't know how old you are, but when I was younger, there was the official rate for the US dollar. And then there was the rate at which you could import things. So if you wanted a Kenwood, Kenwood music systems were a big thing. So all my music systems used to be Kenwood. And for that, it wasn't 40 rupees to a dollar. It used to be 200 rupees to the dollar. So for every dollar that the system costed, you effectively had to pay 200 rupees per dollar, because that was, working in the smuggling cost and everything. So it's like that. It increases. Smuggling increases the price. Smuggling also criminalizes, because, you essentially have a conflict economy, and it works in perfectly. The entire economy is a conflict economy run by a bunch of thugs masquerading around as, saviors. But you tell me, tell me one criminal who doesn't pretend to be the savior of all his people.
We have seen many Bahubalis in UP and Bihar dying of late, and all of them were celebrated by the people as great messiah of the people. But Iran has been helping Hamas. Of course, Iran is very hostile to Israel, and there's a leadership contest going on between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. But what was the entire approach of the Saudi Arabia to the entire conflict? and also Turkey. We saw Turkey making lots of noise along with our Pakistani foreign minister. So how did this great, not a great game, but this small game, how did it play out?
It played out in several different ways because Iranian supply routes, because Egypt can't stand Iran at the moment. They are at loggerheads. Sisi has outright accused his Shia minority of disloyalty. So, it's extremely tense. The Saudis hate Iran right now. So the Emiratis hate Iran. So they have been completely very, very clear that they're not going to allow any smuggling. What smuggling happens, therefore, is extremely expensive, right? Which shows in how the war economy of Hamas got affected. If you remember the last time they were able to fire huge amounts of rockets for several days into Israel, now they were running out of rockets. After the first 2 days, there were no significant barrages after the first 2 days. First 2 days, they fired about 2,000 rockets. After that, it dropped drastically. Right? So they're running out of things. Most of them are home produced. And because they're home produced, they're so bad, 20% of them just fall back on themselves. So 20% fall back on themselves, 60% never reach the target. So only 20% make it through, ultimately. So it's a very skewed up thing. So the Saudi role has been, if anything, it's made the expense of that smuggling even greater. Turkey has just been making a lot of noise because remember, Turkey and Israel used to have extremely close relations. So whatever contacts Turkey has had with Hamas are compromised to Israel, number one. The sea smuggling routes are virtually impossible to navigate. It's probably easier to smuggle it in by the narrow land border with Egypt than it is to smuggle it in through the naval border, through the coastline. The other problem with Turkey...
Why is that? Why is that? It's because of Israeli Navy?
Yeah, because of the Israeli Navy, because noticing things on the sea is basically open. So, you can notice boats and things happen very fast. The detection happens very rapidly, unless you're using some super secret submarine to smuggle. And even there, the detection there isn't particularly tough. So sea-based smuggling is very limited. Sometimes it happens where, a fishing boat maybe strays outside, rendezvous with another fishing boat. The problem is Israel immediately picks up any communications between boats and intercepts them. So it's actually easier to detect and intercept on sea than it is on land, even though the sea border is many times longer than the land border. So there's that. And the fact is that, Erdogan has, he's pretty much destroyed his military. All the repeated purges of the military that have happened over the last 6-7 years, there's a huge amount of expertise that has just gone. It no longer exists. To create it is going to take you another 15 to 20 years. So, all the ability to, supply, smuggle or whatever, it's severely eroded.
But coming to the Pakistan, Pakistani foreign minister, he went to a news channel in America and ended up making an anti-Semitic remark. So what did Pakistan try to achieve in this entire conflict? What was its game? Simply playing to the domestic gallery or trying to bargain something from America or other countries?
Look, Pakistan has no game to play except on Kashmir and Afghanistan, right? So I think the most valuable contribution that Pakistan did were these horsemen dressed as Ertugrul running through the streets of Karachi. I've actually tweeted that video. Surprisingly, it was said to be by some of my Israeli friends saying, what the hell is happening out there? But that was their most useful contribution. Other than what can Pakistan do realistically? I mean, they don't have money to feed themselves. They're on the verge of an economic crisis. Where are they going to send money abroad?
Yeah. Perhaps they were trying to just make noise to please their domestic constituency, which is very hostile to Israel. But coming to the Israel again, what exactly were the military objectives of the Israel and how much they were able to achieve before Biden said no?
Uh, Look, they were able to kill a significant part of the localized Hamas leadership. They were also able to, and this isn't an achievement of Israel per se, but it's more that, the more rockets that Hamas uses up, the more the more depleted they are. Because Israel can be resupplied, Hamas can't be resupplied. The resupply takes a very, very long time because it is a smuggling resupply. So what the Israelis achieved mostly is in terms of how much of the Hamas leadership they killed. And this, goes one of two ways. Number one is that it actually enables the survivors to rise up the social ladder much quicker. So, the new leadership becomes much more accurate, much more deadly, much more ruthless because they have survived. They know how to survive. Right? So it has that effect. On the other hand, when you kill so many of the bomb makers and the communications people, even though more ruthless people come up to the top, the capacity building takes a very, very, very long time. So they've made worse enemies, but those enemies to become potent again will require a longer period of time. So they've extended the gaps. They know there's another round coming, but the Israeli assessment is they have extended the time frame. Because the last rocket fusillade was in what 2014. So 2014, it's taken almost 7 years for them to do this. They believe that another, if they've increased it to 8, 9, maybe even 10 years, then they've succeeded.
But
remember, they had to use a lot less effort this time. Last time, the campaign was a lot longer. They believe that they have extended the period of the next rocket, of the next war or whatever you want to call it, by another 7 to 10 years at a much lower cost than they did the last time.
But the root cause of this round of conflict, which was eviction of certain families from the East Jerusalem, I think that will continue to take place, right? And the root
that
cause
wasn't the root cause of the conflict. The root cause of the conflict is Hamas is always looking to, create some trouble. There was a civil conflict, which is very different from the military conflict.
Yes.
The civil conflict wasn't even the evictions. See, the evictions are an excuse. Because that land never belonged to the Palestinians living there. This has been proven in court. They never paid for that land. Whereas the people wanting to evict them actually have the property documents.
Okay, yeah.
And mind you, it isn't some great Jewish conspiracy documents. These are Ottoman documents. The Ottoman, the Eyalet of Philistine, the Ottoman governor of Palestine sold it to them. So you can't even say this is some great Zionist conspiracy or whatever nonsense that these people talk about. So they
will come up with the Jewish banker bribing the Ottoman governor and forging the document.
Do that. They'll keep coming up with this kind of nonsense.
Yes.
So it's like during that the conversion of the Basilica of Hagia Sophia back to a mosque. They were showing you, Mehmet Fatih bought it for money and all of that. Which of course went against them because the property documents in Ayodhya show that it was actually purchased and ownership was somewhere else. And of course, ownership, when you've conquered and pillaged a city, holding a knife to somebody's throat and saying, sell it to me at these rock bottom prices is not really a sale.
Yes.
It is still extortion. But anyway. This is just, remember, what happens at Sheikh Jarrah is the trigger. It is not the root cause. The root cause goes in much, much deeper, even before the partition of Israel, partition of Palestine. But, if you look at it, the underlying cause for ongoing conflict is the complete failure of the Palestinian leadership. First and foremost, 70% of it is that, 30% is Israel's own intransigence with regards to a two-state solution. Right? That said, every time they've tried to force a two-state solution, the Palestinians keep rejecting it. So it's a mix, but but if you were to allocate blame, it's about 70 to 75% Palestinian leadership blame, 20 to 25% Israeli blame for it.
But people will come and say it's a moral question. And with a great power comes great responsibility. So Israel should not retaliate against the Palestinians when they're under.
We all know who we're talking about, aren't we? The Spider-Man view of Dhruv Rathi's Spider-Man interpretation of the entire universe. Yeah. Look, morality here is very simple. If the Palestinians were doing this completely non-violently, they say we are not going to pick up a rock, we will take Israeli bullets to our face, we will not pick up a rock. Nobody will be able to defend Israel. If the Palestinians say we are going to hunger strike unto suicide or whatever, go fast unto death, nobody could say anything.
You are basically proposing Gandhigiri to Palestinians.
I've told the Palestinians this. I met, Saib Arakat. I've met Nabil Shah. I've met Hanan Ashrawi, and I asked them the same question. Why do you create this moral conundrum for us where you are not being peaceful? If you were absolutely peaceful, there is no way in hell that we could, create a moral equivalence. They never gave an answer.
Yeah.
They never give you an answer because it seems that they want themselves to fail. Tell me how different is the Palestinian leadership from Rahul Gandhi? In fact, you can say Rahul Gandhi is smarter than the Palestinian leadership because he's only lost 2 elections very badly. With the Palestinian leadership, they have lost every round for the last 70 years and they're still not changing tactics, boss. Right?
Maybe this idea that they're part of
I think Rahul Gandhi might be Palestinian.
Oh, that's a claim. That's a new claim now. The WhatsApp stories will be built around it and circulated.
Let's create a WhatsApp group and circulate it.
Excuse me, I'm not into business of creating fake news, Abhijit. Chhattisgarh police will file an FIR against me. So, but coming to the last 2 points, why was Syria and Jordan completely silent?
Syria is bogged down in too much of its own this thing. Jordan has pretty much washed its hands. Jordan doesn't know what to do because, Jordan was basking in the fact that it was the critical player in this entire Israel global saga, Israel-Palestinian global saga. And now because the Emiratis and Saudis have patched up, whatever negotiating tools the Jordanians had with the Israelis is gone. So Jordan, the biggest loser after Iran in that entire rapprochement between the Arabs and Israel has been Jordan. Because its salience is gone, its worth is gone, finished.
And what was the India stand? India took the very routine kind of a stand in the United Nations. What explains this behavior that you're continuing with the previous policy with respect to Israel and Palestine?
So, this was, I think, was it a French diplomat who told me this, that, strategic ambiguity is a great asset when other people don't know what you're going to do. But strategic schizophrenia, where you yourself don't know what you're going to do, is never an asset to anyone. And therein lies India's problem. What do we have to gain by supporting the principled right of Palestinians to throw rocks? Besides, what exact right was in question out here? Is Gaza occupied? No. Who was firing the rockets? The Gazans were. But Gaza is not occupied. So what exact legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are we talking about?
Hmm.
Have we even decided what the map of Jerusalem is at the moment? I think you have to go back to 1948, 47, 48, when the partition of Palestine was happening. The Israelis and the Arabs agreed to nothing except one thing. Do you know what that one thing they agreed to was?
No.
That the Indian plan for the partition of Palestine was the most bogus, useless plan they had ever seen. They both rejected it out of hand.
What was that plan?
It was an absolute nonsense plan, I think, for a bicameral state where everybody would live in peace and harmony, singing Kumbaya or whatever. I forget now. I forget what that plan was, but
I'll have to look
yeah.
into it.
But the one thing that they both agreed on,
Indians are useless,
was that whoever had come up with the Indian plan for the partition of Palestine didn't know diplomacy, didn't know the history, and didn't know Palestine.
I know whom you are pointing out here.
I'm not pointing to anyone. I'm just telling you what the Israelis and the Arabs at that point in time said.
Okay, so let's. It seems that Indian policy struck into that 1948, and
curiously enough, it was somebody who wrote a book called Glimpses of World History.
So
a historian who was clueless about history.
Yeah. Let's hope that we will be able to move beyond the glimpses of world history and come to the real history and the real world. But thank you, Abhijit, for briefing us on the recent developments in Israel and Palestine.